I extend a very warm welcome to all those who are present this afternoon to attend this talk on history textbooks and the formation of NCERT 1947 to 1961. The talk is to be delivered by Dr. Pratik Kumar, who is a fellow with us currently, and he also teaches history at Ramlal Anand College, University of Delhi. So I extend a very warm welcome to him as well. Two questions to my mind are important among other questions with regard to this topic. The first, of course, is the larger theoretical or philosophical question of why should history matter for the present? Why should the narratives of history, why should the debates of history, why should the understanding of history matter at all? Why can't people simply say that this is the kind of present and this is the kind of future we want, and let us make an effort to build it? This is just a question, and we know that in most societies that does not happen. For whatever reasons, it is considered important that history should be paid attention to in order to support a certain kind of vision of the present. So this is first question. I don't know whether Pratik is going to talk about this issue or not. Second, of course, is the question of the history textbooks in the 1950s India and how the endeavor to write a certain kind of history, both of medieval India and modern India, and of course later to ancient India as well, coalesced with a certain institutionalized effort to create mechanisms such as NCERT, but there were other institutions also, which would try to set a certain narrative, not fixed but more or less definitive narrative, authoritative narrative about India's past. And it was seen as part of, in the 1950s, it was seen as part of nation building. And it was also seen as part of a kind of planned endeavor, just like there was planning in everything else. So in setting the narratives of history and in writing textbooks also, there was, of course, an increased role for the state as it was conceived in the 1950s. And all these developments ultimately led to the formation of what is known as NCERT. I would not take too much of time. With this very small introduction, I would now request Pratik to go ahead with his presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ravi sir. Let me begin this discussion by acknowledging my deep sense of gratitude to Chairman Sri Nirpen Mishra ji, Director Sri Sanjeev Nandan Sahai ji, Joint Director Dr. Ravi Mishra ji, whose comment and suggestions are always important to enhance the quality of my research. My guru and mentor Professor Hiraman Tiwari, who is not here because of some official engagements. Dr. Naren Sukla ji, Vikas ji, and Professor Arvind Sinha, my former teacher. And all my friends, colleagues, and teachers, those who came here from various colleges of Delhi University and JNU. I am also thankful to library staffs of Prime Minister Museum and Library for their constant support and help. Let me clarify it that this discussion is a part of a project on which I am working here, titled History Textbook and Politics of National Identities, a case study of NCERT, completely funded by Prime Minister Museum and Library. I'm extremely thankful to PMML for offering me this opportunity to speak on one of the most significant themes of modern history, history, textbook, and politics. For the purpose of convenience, I have divided my presentation into 3 sections. The first section of this presentation, or discussion I can say, is basically talking about the issues and challenges involved in writing history textbook in post-independent India. And I have deliberately chosen a time period between 1947 and 1961 that I will discuss while I'm going to talk about in detail. Within this section, I'm going to talk about the politics involved in writing the history of freedom movement in India. What was the politics? I'm also going to talk about certain other controversies related with the writing and publication of history textbook, like the teaching of textbook issued by Pakistan Education Board in one of the schools of Calcutta. Within this section, I'm also going to talk about the presence of communist propaganda in the textbook issued by Kerala State during the period of 1947 and 1961, especially in the year 1958. So, the second theme of this discussion is about the formation of NCERT. So, amid all this, troubled time of, controversies and all, what was the reason which led to the formation of NCERT in 1961? And the first set of history textbook issued by NCERT and the politics involved in that. I will try to cover all these points. So if we look at the question of writing history in independent India, I think it was a major challenge before the historian. What to write, how to write, what will be the source and all. So history writing in its true sense was an attempt to overcome the imperialist tradition of history writing, and it was basically a nationalist defense, characterized especially by claim of correcting the history. So, in post-independent India, basically historians were trying to overcome the narrative prepared by the imperialist historian, and on the name of correcting history, they were trying to write textbooks. So, however, the claim of correcting the past and recovering the self became a political issue. In the newly independent India, the writing of history became a subject of political expectation and pressure. And the question of history writing was at the center of parliamentary discussion and debate. This was happening in the first few decades of India's independence. We have all the records available here in Nehru Memorial Library also. And far from the Ranke's vision of writing a scientific history, writing history in first few decades of India's independence meant fulfilling some political commitments and showing loyalty to political party in power. So this is also evident, whatever I'm saying, this is also evident from the case of writing of the history of freedom movement in India, a project raised and planned by one of the noted historians of the time, Professor R.C. Majumdar, that I'm going to talk about in detail. So the issue and challenge involved in writing history textbook started just after India's independence. And I request all of you to please pay attention to the dates, because that will tell you, the method, what was the method used for writing the history textbook independent India, what was the time span, what was the limit of time given by the ministries and various committees constituted by the ministries. Hence, attempts were made to write an authentic history, the textbook, on India's struggle for freedom. And R.C. Majumdar, as I have mentioned, a noted historian of his time, moved a resolution in Jaipur session of Indian Historical Record Commission, it is basically IHRC, held in February 1948. Indian Historical Record Commission, in its first meeting, put forward this idea, and I am reading from the primary source, that an attempt be made to compile a list of important records, both published and unpublished, bearing upon the national struggle for freedom. And in order to draw the public attention to this project of writing the history of freedom movement in India, Majumdar wrote an article titled History of India's Struggle. The title of this article was History of India's Struggle, and it was published in New Democrat. It was a weekly journal of Institute of Political Science, Bharatiya Vidya Bhavan, Bombay. Why I'm talking about this journal and this article? That I'm going to discuss. This article was very important because it talks about what was the necessity of writing the history of freedom movement in India. So in May 7th issue of this journal, Majumdar explained the necessity of writing a history of India's struggle for freedom. That is why this article is important, because the same article was forwarded to the then Prime Minister Pandit Nehru. I am going to talk about them. And in this article, he observed that the task of writing history of India's struggle for freedom is so vast and extensive that it could not be possible for a private individual or agency to complete it. Hence, it would be the duty of a state to launch a scheme to complete the project. So there was a direct demand for having a project on national movement. So he was raising this point that this project should be sponsored by government, because it's such a huge project that it cannot be possible for an individual agency to work on it. So it should be government funded project. And that is why it is important to talk about this article. As I mentioned a few minutes back, a copy of this article was sent to the Prime Minister, Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, that it is necessary to have a history of India's freedom struggle written from Indian perspective. So a copy of this article was sent to Pandit Nehru, the then Prime Minister of India. The PM Secretariat advised Majumdar to contact the Ministry of Information and Broadcasting. A letter to this ministry was sent on June 15th, 1948, but he received no reply. Majumdar ji, in his book, he writes, if you read the History of Freedom Movement in India by R.C. Majumdar, he was writing with a disappointment that in spite of discussing such an important issue, he received no response from the ministry. Then he sent a letter to President Dr. Rajendra Prasad addressing the necessity of writing the history of freedom movement in India. And in his reply, dated August 26, 1948, the President happily approved the proposal. And it is important to mention here or discuss here the reply of President. What was his reply? So I'm reading from the original text. Rajendra Babu replied, I agree with you that it is necessary to have a history of Indian struggle written by a competent body. I shall consider how best to push forward this scheme. If you have any scheme ready, kindly send it to me. This was the reply of President. President Dr. Rajendra Prasad invited the attention of Government of India to the urgency of this work, and the Ministry of Education was entrusted with the planning and execution of this project. However, it was replied in the next session of Indian Historical Record Commission, from where the story started. And the next session of Indian Historical Record Commission held in December 1948. First it held in February, then in December 1948. And the response from the government of India was not very, positive. So I'm reading from the text that a response from government of India was still awaited. To implement the decision of government of India, because President, he has already written a letter to the Prime Minister and the Education Minister also. So to implement the decision of the government of India, an expert committee of members was appointed. I mean the 3 members, with Dr. Tarachand as the chairman. The committee, just wait. Yeah. The committee held its first meeting on January 5th, 1950 and made several recommendations. One such recommendation is important to talk about, and I'm again going to read from the primary source. January 5th, 1950, it is almost 2 years since Majumdar was trying to write the history of freedom movement, and see the response of government. That the project history should be confined to the period of 80-70 AD to 15th August 1947, and that the movements prior to 80-70 may be treated in an introductory chapter. I mean, I don't know why such a recommendation came from the side, because we know the relevance of period prior to 80-70. What was the reason for mentioning this point that event prior to 80-70 should be the part of introduction? We know about it, what was the importance of, or still we discuss about it, the first war of independence, 1857. But it was discussed in the meeting that events prior to 80-70 should come in introduction. There should be no specific chapter on it. The Ministry of Education, however, felt unable to accept these recommendations. The cold response of ministry is available in the proceeding of the meeting of the 27th session of Indian Historical Record Commission, Nagpur, December 1950. And the ministry writes, I'm again reading from the primary source, quote, on account of the present financial crisis, it is not possible for government to find any substantial amount of money for the accomplishment of this task. Task means the project of writing of history of freedom movement. It is therefore essential that this work should progress through the voluntary efforts of scholars and learned societies. Unquote. So this was the response of ministry. Ministry was finding it difficult to spend some money on the project of writing the history of freedom movement of India. And hence with this decision of ministry, I mean, I call it a direct impact on the committee constituted for supervising the task of writing the history of freedom movement in India. So in the expert committee meeting held on 18th September 1951, Chairman Dr. Tarachand suggested that instead of Ministry of Education undertaking the entire work itself, it might be entrusted to an academic body like Indian History Congress or a university. So they wanted Indian History Congress or a particular university to take over this project of writing the history of freedom movement. But the committee came to the conclusion that Delhi University would be the most suitable agency for undertaking the project. And we all know the relevance of Delhi University because it is centrally located. So the committee came to the conclusion that the government should get in touch with Delhi University, and university should assist in the committee to complete this project. However, it is interesting to mention that the negotiation failed. The negotiation between the Ministry of Education and Delhi University failed. Finally, the Education Ministry submitted a memorandum for the consideration of Standing Finance Committee in regard to the scheme for the compilation of a history of freedom movement in India. So finally they have submitted to a Standing Finance Committee. And the estimated cost of this scheme was calculated rupees 7,34,940, and the year it was 1952. So total cost was nearly 7,50,000 if we round it up. The scheme of writing a history of freedom movement in India was considered by Standing Finance Committee in their meeting held on August 10th, 1951. But later on, the Ministry of Education submitted a revised scheme to accomplish this work of the preparation of history of freedom movement in India at the cost of rupees 3,44,034 rupees. So half of the money, and I believe the revised plan was submitted by Professor R.C. Majumdar, because if you remember the letter of President, he had requested Rajendra Prasad requested Majumdar to submit a proposal. So I think this revised proposal was submitted by Majumdar. It was also there in the introductory of his book, History of Freedom Movement in India. The Education Secretary, in his note dated February 11, 1952, informs that the Home Ministry accepted the proposal and suggested that the Commission for supervising the work should consist of only 3 members, that is Dr. Rajendra Prasad, President of India, Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, Prime Minister of India, Maulana Azad, Minister of Education, Government of India. So these 3 people, they were supposed to supervise the work of historian. After consideration on various alternatives, it was decided in consultation with the Ministry of Finance that the best method of getting the work done would be to set up a small, high-powered commission. The commission was asked to undertake the responsibility of the preparation on and execution of the plan, but the actual work would be done by a board of editors, and this board would work under the supervision of commission, the commission which was created on 11th February 1952. So within this discussion, all the discussions were going on, and finally on December 30th, 1952, if you remember the date when R.C. Majumdar first raised this question of writing the history of freedom movement, it was 1948. But finally, the committee was constituted, board of editor was constituted to write the history of freedom movement in India on December 30th, 1952. And the ministry appointed a board of editors after 4 years. The board of editors consists of following members: Syed Mahmood, he was chairman of this board of editors, and he was basically the Minister of Transport, Industries and Agriculture in Bihar. Acharya Narendra Dev, Dr. S.N. Sen, Professor D.V. Poddar, Professor Muhammad Habib, Professor R.C. Majumdar, Professor K.A. Neelakantha Sastri, and Balwanji Mehta. These were the members to this board of editors. Sri Mr. S.M. Ghosh, he was member of parliament, but he was working in this committee as a honorary secretary. So if you look at the composition of this committee, the key positions were given to the politicians. In spite of knowing this fact that at least 2 or 3 were trained historians, but the key positions were given to them. But no matter, we are going to discuss the entire story. The project further received motivation when President Dr. Rajendra Prasad wrote a letter to Pandit Nehru and Maulana Azad, Minister of Education, showing his concern for writing an authoritative history of freedom movement in India. Rajendra Babu was so concerned about this matter that he again wrote a letter to Prime Minister, and a passage from his letter shows his interest in the project. And I'm reading from the original letter. All these letters are available in National Archives of India, there are specific files, one can visit it if interested. Quote, some time ago, I wrote suggesting that steps should be taken to get an authoritative history of freedom movement in India, particularly during its last 2 decades, compiled and written. Materials for such history are fast disappearing. I'm not sure if any particular steps have been taken to preserve them. I think the first step is to appoint a small committee of whole-timers employed on this job who should be charged with the responsibility of planning the history and collecting the materials. The central and state governments should be asked to assist this committee with whatever materials they may have in their possession. This was this was a particular section of his letter written to Pandit Nehru. President's letter was important for 2 reasons. First, it encouraged the historians of the time to write the history of India. And secondly, it acted as a catalyst in breaking the inertia of Ministry of Education. Because we have already seen it took almost 4 years to decide the committee and to start the project. So the first meeting of the Board of Editors was held on January 2nd, 1953. The meeting was addressed by the then Education Minister, Maulana Azad, who mentioned that the task of writing the history of India and a struggle for independence is a task of national importance. The board was supposed to complete the work within a period of 3 years. So within a period of 3 years, the board was supposed to complete the task of writing the history of freedom movement. A program was outlined by the Ministry of Education. Dr. R.C. Majumdar, he prepared the first rough draft of Volume 1 before the end of 1954, and it was circulated to all members of the board. A meeting of the board was held at Ahmedabad on December 31st, 1954, and on January 1st and 2nd, 1955. After a prolonged discussion extending over 3 days, the board generally approved the layout of Volume 1st, the draft which was prepared by R.C. Majumdar. But it also endorsed the suggestion of K.A. Nilkantha Sastry that each member should send to the director a copy of draft with marginal notes mentioning his views. This was interesting because Nilkantha Sastry, he mentioned this point that each member of this board should comment on the first draft prepared by R.C. Majumdar, and they should send this draft to the director. It was also decided at the meeting that the draft should be kept strictly confidential at this stage, as their circulation might lead to undesirable and unnecessary controversy, because we know the situation as well. So it was decided to keep it confidential. Unfortunately, this decision was not strictly implemented. It was shared with Minister of Education, Azad Sahib. It is evident from the writings of R.C. Majumdar, because in a good number of articles he discussed about this point, and I'm reading from the secondary literature from his book. He mentioned to R.C. Majumdar that the draft prepared appeared to him very satisfactory, but he received complaints that the role of Bengal had been unduly exaggerated. Whoever shared the draft with Maulana Sahib and other is still a subject of investigation when the content was strictly confidential. This was perhaps the beginning of textbook politics, what I personally feel, whose effect can be seen even today, because every day we read in newspaper regarding NCERT, regarding the content of history textbook, debate and discussion in parliament. It may appear somewhat strange, but a hand-picked and arbitrarily chosen historians were asked to write the history of India, compromising with the academic standard. Those who had devoted themselves so long to the study of Indian history were kept outside. A meeting of the Board of Editor was held on March 28, 1955 to discuss a note written by Dr. Tarachand on the draft of the proposed writing. Both Humayun Kabir and Tarachand, Education Secretary former and present, attended the meeting by a special invitation. Commenting on the first draft of the history of freedom struggle in India, Dr. Tarachand said, quote, "The present draft, volume 1, the one which was prepared by R.C. Majumdar," he mentioned, it could not be regarded as a historical text at all. 3 years of, means time span, a lot of energies he must have given to complete this project, to prepare the first draft. And in one line, by giving one line, the draft was rejected. The present draft, volume 1, could not be regarded as a historical text at all, hence rejected. The Board of Editor was finally dissolved with effect from January 1st, 1956, and the project of preparing a unified history of freedom movement was given to Tarachand, former Secretary, Education Secretary, Government of India. Humayun Kabir, he wrote forward to the Tarachand History of Freedom Movement in India, Volume 1, and it is important to mention what he is saying here. He mentioned the reason for dissolving the board. Please remember the time. The board was dissolved in 1956. The first volume of History of Freedom Movement in India came in 1961, written by Tarachand, because finally the task was given to him, and it was published by Ministry of Information and Broadcasting. So after 6 years of a long time span, means the concerned authorities decided to mention about this fact that why the board was dissolved. And I'm reading from the original text. It is a foreword written by Humayun Kabir. Quote, "The board provided very useful service, but it soon became clear that an ad hoc body set up on a temporary basis could not complete the work of collecting the necessary material, still less prepare a unified history by sifting and interpreting the data. It includes both academic historians and active politicians, and the differences in their approach were seen even at a stage of collection of data. These differences became still more marked when it came to interpret the material that had already been collected. It was therefore decided to transfer the work of further collection to the National Archives and of interpretation and narration to one single scholar of distinction. Accordingly, Dr. Tarachand, who had been chairman of the Planning Commission at the earlier stage and had a special competence for the task, was entrusted with the work of sifting the material and preparing a unified history of freedom movement," unquote. So this was the reply, why board was dissolved. But it's interesting to mention that R.C. Majumdar, who published his own version of India's struggle for freedom in 1962, he refuted all these points. I'm going to talk about them. He clearly mentioned that there was no difference between the members. The situation became more complicated when R.C. Majumdar published his version of book, History of the Freedom Movement in India, published in 1962, and made it clear to the readers that there were no serious differences among the members of the board in regard to the collection of material or interpretation of material. I mean, a reason well cited for the dissolution of board by Humayun Kabir in his foreword written for Tarachand's book. We also see some fallacies in this whole exercise of forming a board of editors and writing about India's struggle for freedom. A false narrative created by Humayun Kabir came to our attention. Janab Kabir's remarked at the recommendation of Indian Historical Record Commission made at the Jaipur session in February 1948 found an immediate response from late Maulana Azad. By that time, Maulana Azad was already passed away. So he mentioned that Maulana Sahib had immediately, replied to the project of writing of history of freedom movement in 1948. And Maulana Sahib directed that steps should henceforth be taken to give effect to this project of writing of history of freedom movement. Humayun Kabir forward to Tarachand, History of Freedom Movement in India, Volume 1, published in 1961, clearly mentions this point, and I'm reading from the text. Quote, "It was therefore not surprising that at very first meeting of the Indian Historical Record Commission, held after India became free, a resolution was passed for preparing an authentic and comprehensive history of the different phases of Indian struggle for independence. This recommendation found an immediate response from the late Maulana Abdul Kalam Azad, who directed that steps should henceforth be taken to give effect to it," unquote. If that was the case, why had Majumdar not received any reply of his letter written earlier? I am raising these questions. We do not have any concrete evidence that confirms Maulana Sahib's interest in the plan proposed by Majumdar, which emphasized writing a history of freedom struggle in India. It would be easily anticipated who played the key role in accepting and promoting the plan of writing of history of freedom movement in India. I have already discussed about the letter written by Rajendra Babu. The entire episode behind writing the history of freedom movement, freedom struggle in India, is colored in a deep mystery. With this episode, one can easily understand the deep-seated politics involved in writing history textbook in independent India. I mean, this is just one case. There are endless number of cases. What was the need of forming two parallel committees? This is the important question. Who formed the committee? It is also a point to raise who allowed and initiated the idea of having another committee under the supervision of Tarachand at the late stage when the first committee prepared different chapters and the first draft of the history of freedom struggle in India was generally approved by the board. It's an important question. Who created the second committee when the final draft was already submitted? It is also clear that some influence was already at work to reject and refute the work done by R.C. Majumdar and make new arrangements for completing this project. I mean, this is one controversy related with the textbook. I have selected a limited number of controversies, and within this background, I am going to talk about what led to the formation of NCERT. Because of these controversies, there was no national curriculum, there was no structured way of suggesting a reading list and all. So that is why National Commission, committee like NCERT came into existence that I'm going to talk about. After a prolonged controversy over writing the history of India's struggle for freedom, the alarming issue of teaching textbook issued by Pakistan Education Board came from the region of Bengal. In the year 1958, this controversy related to history textbook came to our notice. A report published in Calcutta newspaper titled Anand Bazar, dated February 21st, 1958, criticized the education authorities concerned for having failed to detect the use of textbook approved by the Pakistan Education Department taught in the school of Toliganj area of Calcutta. It was said that these books contained objectionable passages. The matter was raised in Parliament by Sri Nawab Singh Chauhan. He was basically a member of Parliament from Aligarh constituency. He raised this question, and several questions were asked. On inquiry, it was found, and I'm reading from the original text. The school was named Mullahat School and has been functioning since 1938. The three books approved by the Director of Public Instruction East Pakistan, and one book written according to the syllabus published were being taught in one school only in the Tollygunge area of Calcutta. The names of the books are Sabuj Path, Part 2, written by Samsu Nahar and Anwar Chaudhary. Chotedar Mahanavi by Sayyid A.S.M. Ismail. Khokhar Boi by Muzamul Haq and Afzalul Haq. Chotedar Par by Fazul Kareem, written according to the syllabus published by Director of Public Instruction, East Pakistan. Abdul Latif, a Pakistani national living in India with a visa, was the headmaster of this school. I am talking about year 1958. The headmaster of this school was a Pakistani national. He was in India on visa. No permission was given for teaching this textbook in this school. The books had since been struck off the list of the school. The headmaster was placed under suspension and the school committee was reconstituted. This happened after the discussion and debate in Parliament. The study of report made it clear that a Pakistani national had been appointed headmaster of a school in the West Bengal region of India in the year 1958, and some Pakistani textbooks were being taught in that school. The case was immediately transferred to the Ministry of Home Affairs. The files are available in National Archives of India, which took several measures to prevent the circulation of textbook from other countries in India in consultation with Ministry of External Affairs. The textbook in question were thoroughly examined and content was explained in detail. Sabuj Path, I talked about this book written by Samsu Nahar and Anwar Chaudhary. On the page number 4 of this book, contains a particular statement, and I'm reading from the book. The copy of the book is also available. It is a huge file there in National Archive. So I'm reading from it. Now the name of our country is Pakistan. Now we are inhabitant of independent Pakistan. This was happening in the year 1958, after a decade of India's independence. We can imagine the condition. The correspondence between the state authority and the government of India found this statement highly objectionable. The controversy of teaching Pakistani textbook in one of the schools in Calcutta raised several questions. Who appointed a Pakistani national in one of the government school of Calcutta as a headmaster? Why were the young children of Mollahat School, Calcutta, were being misinformed? Who were promoting this idea of teaching Pakistani textbook and why? Was it not a matter concerning the security of newly independent India? Whoever had executed this idea was illegal, and the teaching of Pakistani textbook posed a serious question. The nation was in dire need of a national curriculum and a standard textbook. So again, I'm coming back to my central argument. But amid this troubled time, these controversies, the country was in need of a national curriculum and a standard textbook of history. One another controversy is coming from the region of Kerala, and I'm going to discuss about it briefly. I know I'm running out of time. So another controversy came in 1958 from the state of Kerala. The office of the Ministry of Education, Government of India, had received the two enclosed cuttings from Hindustan Standard and Organizer regarding the presence of objectionable material in the textbook of Kerala. The matter was discussed in the Consultative Committee of Parliament on August 27, 1958, and it was said that the Kerala textbook must be examined immediately. In the later address to Ministry of Education, Government of India, the Director of the Central Bureau of Textbook Research, CBTR, stated that the present set of history books will have to be examined on the following points. What are these points? The first, the extent to which actual facts of history have been distorted in these books, the extent to which parties in the world have unnecessarily been criticized, the extent to which any one ideology is given as the very best in exclusion from all others. Most of these books are published in Malayalam. Therefore, it was decided to seek the assistance of language expert. The scrutiny was confined to the textbook in social studies, the history textbook, including history. A set of 4 books, 2 each from social studies and language studies, were examined by Central Bureau of Textbook Research. And the CBTR in its report said, I'm reading from the original text, quote, "The translation together with the original books are placed. The passages have been flagged. Insofar as the content of the books are concerned, they do include the objected to the statements brought to our notice," unquote. In this regard, and in this connection, Kerala School Managers Association said that all efforts have been made to overstate the case of communism, particularly its achievement in Russia and China, and very little attention has been paid to the non-communist countries. The achievement of non-communist countries have been belittled but even distorted as to appear in the negative light. The CBTR, Central Bureau of Textbook Research, in its letter to the Ministry of Education, Government of India, clearly mentioned this point. And again, I am reading from the original text, quote, "There is no doubt that here and there the books have overrated the case of communism and understated the achievements of non-communist communities of the world. But if any action is contemplated, it is necessary to know where proper education ends and indoctrination begins." Owing to the verdict of Supreme Court and subsequent rejection of Kerala Education Bill 1958, we all know about its relevance, attempts were made to spread communist ideology through these textbooks. And as an alternative, the communist government started using textbook as a tool for communist indoctrination. This is also evident from a letter written by Kerala Education Minister, Professor Joseph Mundesri, who claims that Soviet education is most efficient. There was no discussion on the Indian education system, although it was, in the formative period. But he discussed about the Soviet education system. The textbook predominantly glorifies historical incidences related to the communist ideology. The social studies, 3rd series, prescribed for 8th standard, contain a chapter on China titled Communist Victory. It reflects the views of EMS Namudripad. He believes that China will be repeated in Kerala if the parties in opposition form a common anti-communist front. Malayalam Manorama, a text, also draws our attention to the then central government to certain lessons prescribed for high school student in Kerala, in which emphasis has been laid on the achievement of Russia and China, while at the same time underrating the nation-building effort of India. Kerala School Manager Association made a representation to the then President highlighting several revolutionary changes brought by the communist government of Kerala. Sri V.O. Abraham, President of the association, complains that highly exaggerated version about the Soviet Union, China, and other communist countries have been given in the textbook, the history textbook, under social studies published by state government. The content of these textbooks are highly objectionable as they contain details of the progress made in Russia and China, but not a word about the progress made under 5-year plan was discussed in the book. The textbook that are prescribed by the Kerala state government had neglected the noble culture and great achievements of our motherland, and too much importance was given to the achievements of communist countries. The ultimate goal of communist-run government in Kerala was to inculcate negative feeling and destroy the high and the noble thought of our young students on religion and democratic ethos of India. There was no discussion on the role of Kerala in the national movement. A lot of movements, we can discuss about it during the question and answer session. Finally, the formation of NCERT and a beginning of a new chapter. So, amid all these controversies, the government has taken a step towards an important decision. In 1954, the Central Bureau of Textbook Research was established to conduct research on various aspects of textbook production. In this connection, it is important to mention that CBTR also received UNESCO aid for the improvement of curriculum in Indian schools. So UNESCO was also assisting the government of India. Dr. Henry Harrop, a UNESCO expert advisor in curriculum development, was assigned to the CBTR in January 1957. He stayed here in India. He visited a good number of schools, spoke to the teachers, and then he prepared the report. The monograph is based on his visit about 50 schools in 9 Indian states, a study of the syllabi of the Indian states, and in interviews with the state education authorities and headmasters. In his report submitted to Ministry of Education, Harrop made certain important recommendations. Some of the important points of recommendation are mentioned below. Quote, the syllabi should be revised in accordance with the generally accepted guiding principles. There is a need for clearer understanding of the general aim of a school and the specific goals of several subjects. The curriculum should be shared more widely. The issue involved in teaching and publication of history textbook were so alarming that within a decade of country's independence, the government realized the necessity of having an autonomous organization entitled to frame the curriculum, prepare the syllabus, and write textbook for school. In this backdrop, the National Council of Educational Research and Training was established on September 1st, 1961, by merging 7 different institutions established after independence. CBTR, of course, Central Bureau of Textbook Research, was one of them. There is a detailed list of institutions like the Directorate of Extension Program for Secondary Education, the National Institute of Basic Education, the National Fundamental Education Center, the National Institute of Audiovisual Education. I mean, these 7 institutions, they were merged together to form NCERT. Based on the notion of NCERT, a State Council of Educational Research and Training was established in various states, but it is also very important to see whether they were accepting the, the guideline issued by NCERT or not. Over the years, the council turned out to be an institution working for the development of a school education system in the country, focusing on structural changes and reforms. The decade of 1960 was important for 2 reasons. First, it was decided that the existing history textbooks should overcome the predominant colonial narrative of India's past. Second, it was also decided that the textbook must be written by professional historians maintaining the required standard. I don't know why this point came up that, history textbooks should be written by the professional historian, as if like R.C. Majumdar and earlier those who were writing, Kali Kinkar Dattan, they were not professional. This is very interesting. It was UNESCO that first initiated the task of reviewing the history textbook used in Union Territory of Delhi, and this was well mentioned by Professor Romila Thapar. The move was not limited to reviewing the then prescribed textbook, but an attempt was made to bring professionalization and standardization to the writing of history textbook. And still, I always think about it, why they have mentioned this point, as if like there were no professional historian before Professor Romila Thapar. A few selected historians at the time were involved in the writing of textbook, and in fact, they had monopoly over selecting the source for writing the history textbooks. Thus, in the name of bringing professionalization and to bring a standard in history textbook, a long-term battleground was prepared. And this is what I have been discussing for last couple of minutes. A panel of experts was set up by NCERT in 1962 under the chairmanship of Dr. Tara Chand. He was former education secretary, as I mentioned earlier. The panel worked on some of the important aspects such as curriculum, the plan of textbook, and the material that should go in each chapter of these books. It also commissioned author to prepare textbook, but towards the end of 1965, the NCERT felt the need to set up an editorial board with the aim of bringing out model textbook of Indian history. The newly formed editorial board consisted of a chief editor and 3 editors. The council appointed Dr. S. Gopal as chief editor and Dr. S. Narul Hassan, Dr. Satish Chandra, and Dr. Romila Thapar as editors. The basis of this appointment of the chief editor and editor by the council had been a question. What were the criteria laid down by the council for promoting these scholars, or was it just a prerogative or right of the council to appoint the editor and board of editors? I feel there must be some guideline. Did the council also contact other well-known historians of that time, or deliberately neglected them? These are certain questions that can only be revealed with the progress of this project. I mean, the project on which I'm working here at Nehru Prime Minister Museum and Library. Thank you so much for your patience.
Let me take this opportunity to thank Dr. Pratik Kumar for a very informative, very enlightening lecture. And let me also thank all members of the audience for taking time out this afternoon to be there and for enthusiastically participating. Of course, it is a very important subject. Textbooks, I'm not suggesting they are not important. And of course, revision, review must go on. It is an ongoing process of all books, including of textbooks. That, of course, will continue. There will be many other questions in the minds of many people. I think they can ask the speaker and there can be a discussion outside, because now tea is waiting for us for a long time and it's not a good thing to keep it waiting.
Thank you. Thank you.